The first indexing transformation seminar this year. I'm very happy to have a full room of people with us. So Ben will take it onto himself to present the speakers we have today, and then I'll be chairing the rest of the seminar. Cool.
Thank you. So, as many of you know, indexing transformation is now in its fourth year. We are in part a seminar series, and we invite colleagues from across the world and across the country and even locally to present broadly on issues of transformation, intellectual transformation, political transformation, social transformation of all kinds, right? It's been a very rich seminar series, and it's great to have you here. It's especially great today to welcome some colleagues from the English department who I note, as well as our new postgraduate students, new honours students and master's students. It's especially a pleasure today also to welcome two visitors from Brazil, from the University of São Paulo in particular. Many of you will know, or some of you will know at least, that we have a partnership with the University of São Paulo, and Laura Moutinho in particular, professor at the University of São Paulo in anthropology, has done a lot of work to try and get this partnership going. Last year I went and presented there, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience, and there's a really incredible African studies community, especially centered around questions of gender, sexuality, questions of identity, as well as urban studies of the urban and of urban transformation. And it's really a great space for South-South dialogue. And I think it's in that spirit that we welcome the two speakers today. I think someone might say a bit about their biographies before they speak. Both of them are going to speak for about 20 to 25 minutes. Laura will talk about Africa from Brazil, as it were, and Thias will speak a little bit about her emerging doctoral research, which is partly in South Africa. Simone, if you want to introduce them.
Sure.
Just to say, after the two presentations, there will be a chance for questions, but we'll run the presentations one after each other, and there should be about half an hour for discussion. So thank you, and thank you all for coming and being part of our series.
So I do apologize for not having a full background because my Portuguese is very limited. So online I couldn't find everything and translate in time. But so Professor Laura Moutinho is joining us here now, and she's a full professor in anthropology at the University of São Paulo. And then afterwards will be Thais Tiriba, who's a doctorate candidate, also at the University of São Paulo. So we look forward to your presentations.
So thank you so much. And good afternoon. I would like to thank Bernard and Annie for having me here once again, but also for inviting the Thias. It's a pleasure and an honor to share ideas with this audience. Bernard invited me with the purpose of talking about African studies in Brazil and at the University of São Paulo in particular. Last year, when Bernard was at the University of São Paulo and the University Federal of ABC, presenting his own research, I remember I asked him which undergraduate anthropology he teaches at Stellenbosch. Do you remember? I asked, do you teach Gluckman? I asked him. And I think I can start by mentioning that what motivated the question I asked Bernard. This question helps me to start the reflection I would like to share with you today. At the University of São Paulo and most of Brazil, social science is a course, a discipline, where anthropology is taught together with sociology and political science. This is a specific tradition. In the United States and Argentina, for instance, anthropology works with archaeology, linguistics, etc. I remember the four framboise fields. The Brazilian course configuration, therefore, is different. At the University of São Paulo, students have to take some compulsory modules in the first 2 years of the degree program, which is 4 years in total. The British, French, and American anthropological schools of thought are presented within the anthropology program. Anthropology 3 is only based on texts by Levi-Strauss, who was one of the founders of University of São Paulo, of USP. Unlike South Africa, where Radcliffe Brown played an important role founding the chair at UCT that led to the development of social anthropology, Radcliffe Brown was also at USP, but this visit was largely ignored by everyone, even by himself, I assume. Anthropology historians make little reference to his stay. The elitism at the institution was rife at that time. For decades, classes had been taught in French and later in English and not in Portuguese. But the time that Radcliffe Brown was at the institution, São Paulo and Brazil elite favored the French, which perhaps explains the difficulties he faced. It looked like it was a reciprocal hatred. I'm sharing with you some academic gossip. And in these subjects, students have access to classic texts. What is called the British School, which is markedly South African, I know, incorporates the readings of texts by Malinowski, Radcliffe Brown, Evans Pritchard, Leach, Victor Turner. There is one woman, Mary Douglas, Gluckman, Clyde Mitchell. Not many, for example, know that Gluckman is South African. In part, it's understandable. Gluckman's obituary, written by Raymond Firth, begins by erasing his South African origins. This is, I think, the colonial logic. Gluckman's most widely read text, for instance, is the Analysis of Social Situation in Modern Zululand, published in a collection of articles entitled Anthropology of Contemporary Societies, organized by a Brazilian anthropologist, Bela Feldman Bianco. The perspective published here has influenced a great deal of research in Brazil. Elective, not mandatory courses, modules at USP and other departments are about our researchers' subjects. So, for instance, I teach anthropology of African and Afro-Brazilian population, anthropology of emotions, and social markers of difference and intersectionality, which brings the discussion about race, sexuality, gender, and national identity. It's necessary to emphasize that, with rare exceptions, most of the Brazilian anthropological production is limited to the national territory. There is a widespread understanding that these differ from anthropology carried out in North, especially British, North America, and French school. I don't agree, but I will not talk about this point today. I would like just to draw attention to the importance of bilingual translations or publications, Portuguese, English. It's possible to map the influences of articles, books that have been translated into Portuguese. For this reason, I have been working as editor of Revista de Antropologia, our journal, and as a coordinator of the publications for the Brazilian Association of Anthropology, because my goal is to increase publications in Portuguese and in English by South African colleagues. We published, for instance, the brilliant article of Zeto Matebene in the journal in a bilingual manner with a translation made mostly by Thais Tiriba. The global systems of intellectual property, the copyright regime, the systems of production and distribution of knowledge are, as Colin Dart and others have pointed out, neither balanced, nor neutral, nor free of value judgment. Today, especially in the moment where we live in Brazil, with the terrible right-wing government of Jair Bolsonaro and the fake news, it's really sad what's happening there. More than ever, it's necessary to join efforts to put in perspective and put pressure on scientific communication systems. I will not focus on this topic today. I would like to highlight, in line with Bernard's request, some perspectives carried out by Brazilian in African countries. Brazil has the third largest national community of anthropologists in the world, behind the North American and Japanese. The first Brazilian analytical effort was in relation to the search of Africa in Brazil. Researchers like Nina Rodrigues, Roger Bastide, Pierre Verger, Gilberto Freire studied Afro-Brazilian in the first half of 20th century. In the 80s and 90s, research were carried out on the African continent by anthropologists who lived in Brazil but were, for instance, of English origin, such as Peter Fry. Peter Fry was the youngest of the generation of Gluckman and Clyde Mitchell, who researched in Zimbabwe and later helped to found the program of postgraduate studies in social anthropology at the University of Campinas, which is in the state of São Paulo as well, in the 70s. University of São Paulo has consolidated itself as an important center for production of research in this area, hosting, since the late 60s, African intellectuals like Kabengele Munanga from Democratic Republic of Congo and Carlos Serrano from Angola. They were in the creation and for years in the coordination of the Center for African Studies, welcoming researchers from different African countries and supporting research and policies about different subjects. The center also received many activists from the liberation movement of the former African colonies. This field, markedly male in its initial moment, has since been reproduced with great gender diversity. Men have developed their studies in African Portuguese-speaking countries, especially Cape Verde, Angola, Mozambique. There are Brazilian researchers in Benin, Senegal, Uganda, Ghana, Mali, Nigeria, São Tomé and Príncipe, Namibia, South Africa, Sierra Leone, among others. It may surprise you to know that besides countries that have Portuguese as one of their languages, it is South Africa that has received more researchers from Brazil. Brazil is a country of so-called third world. We were colonized by Portugal and became independent in the early 19th century. We only have Portuguese as an official language. As Agnes Nicoma-Dart points out, in Southern Africa, national borders are porous. Entire families speak different languages and have relationships that cross national borders. In Brazil, our borders were consolidated in the previous century, and in a violent educational process imposed Portuguese as a single language. The Brazilian research in African countries does not follow the colonial path that marked the production of anthropology knowledge. English anthropologists, for instance, look at and still look at the realities of the countries that were once colonies of the United Kingdom. The French, Portuguese, and Belgians followed a similar pattern. The researchers that come from Brazil to countries on the African continent necessarily operate from another perspective. A colonial logic is, however, sometimes present in their approach. Fernando Rosa Ribeiro was the first researcher who came from Brazil to South Africa to carry out his doctoral thesis defended in 1995, focusing on the comparison between apartheid and Brazilian racial democracy. Then I came and I did a comparative dissertation on blood mixing miscegenation in both contexts with the material from the Immorality Act. But following a movement of internalization of research agendas in social science in Brazil, the field of African studies has attracted an increasing number of researchers linked to postgraduate centers. These professionals do not form a homogeneous group in any way. Their academic trajectories and the theoretical perspectives that guide their work are very diverse. In fact, in Brazil, the field of studies in Africa has grown significantly. There is an intense flow of ideas and people, even at a time when dramatically we are experiencing a reconfiguration of the state and of the international cooperation. The issue of internalization has been central to the contemporary academic production. Throughout the government of work parties, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and the President Dilma Rousseff, the government supported research projects and programs such as Pro-Africa that allowed transnational South-South alliances. I came here in 2016 and 7 thanks to this initiative. A challenging aspect in relation to comparative research: what to compare and how to do it. I got my PhD comparing Brazil and South Africa. As I said before, the comparison did not homogenize both processes. On the contrary, it illuminated aspects that were not visible in Brazil about the way racism and sexism were part of the national ideology. Subsequently, I worked here with the extreme right wing represented by Eugene Tarblanche in Ventersdorp. It was not a comparative analysis. The issue I pursued was anthropological and deeply human, understanding how a group could remain racist despite all the social technologies, such as, for instance, TRC, that aimed to build a sense of common humanity. At that time, we did not have in the public sphere with legitimacy expressions of this type of policy and subjectivity. At that time. Now, today we do, unfortunately. So I think that comparative works are in fact urgent. They are really important for the present moment. It must be said that there is already an agreement between our faculty and Stellenbosch University. 2 students from the History Department came here through this agreement. The problem the problem we face is that in Brazil, a public university does not charge fees. It took me a while to understand the public here, the idea of public here, the idea of public there. Here is different. The agreement follows a diplomatic rule. Since University of São Paulo receives students free of charge, those who come here would not pay. This is under negotiation, and my fear is that it could render the agreement impossible. What we need is a fee waiver. This would be really sad, as I know that from our side at least, many undergraduate students, as well postgraduate students, are excited about the possibility of coming to Stellenbosch in an exchange program. We are looking forward to welcoming Stellenbosch students in our departments as well. Finally, I'd like to present some more information about the university, as you can see there. You have 7 campus. It's a huge university in a huge city. It's the biggest university in Latin America. You see, you have 3,000 courses. Look at the number of master degrees. And we are responsible for 25% of the Brazilian research in Brazil. So 50% of all scientific papers published by Latin Americans. So this is the international ranking. We're part of BRICS, as you know, but the universities there are under attack now. So things are changing. And so, as you can see, social science, the international mobility bar course, it's great. It's increasing, but it's okay. And social science plays an important role there. Here's outgoing students by course over the past 5 years. So language and literature is the biggest area at our faculty. And here is the percentage of agreements we have. And we have 3 here in South Africa. Stellenbosch is one of them. And the point is that in Europe, especially France and Germany, there is no fees, so it makes easier the agreements there. It's our faculty, so we have anthropology, sociology, political science, and philosophy. Geography, it's human geography and physical geography. History, divided in social history and economic history. And besides, we have linguistics, classical languages, comparative studies in literature in Portuguese, philosophy in Portuguese, Brazilian literature, Portuguese literature, and modern languages. English, German, Spanish, French, Italian, translation studies, and Oriental languages, as you can see there. Arabic, Hebrew, Japanese, Russian. And literary theory and comparative literature. What? So, have here some information. The university is a strong influence on Brazil political life as well. Over the past 20 years, one professor became the president of the Republic, you know, Fernando Henrique Cardoso, and one professor, 2 became Minister of Education, 1 became Minister of Culture, and one was President spokesman person, and one was the mayor of the city of São Paulo. This is USP ranking. I can send it later in PDF to Bernard. He can share with you. And he looks so Capetonian, don't you think? So, And you have an intensive Portuguese course for international students as well. You can take class online or there, and it's free of charge. And a homestay program. You don't have accommodation like here, but the international office has created the homestay program, which aims to give opportunity of cultural exchange between foreign students and students from the school. So I think that it's interesting. We help, as the professors there, we help a lot the students as well. So thank you so much for.
So the next we'll welcome Thais Tiriba, and then we'll have a Q&A session afterwards.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking Bernard for such a generous invitation. It goes without saying what an incredible opportunity this is for me to, for the work I'm doing as well. I'm trying to do so. Thank you very much. My name is Thais Tiriba. I'm a PhD candidate in social anthropology at the University of São Paulo. Institution we're all more familiar now. I would encourage a few to come. I believe that Brazil would be as an interesting place for you guys as South African is for us, to our eyes. And I'm also a São Paulo enthusiast. It's a marvelous place to get to know. I just completed the first year of our 4.5 years PhD program, and I'm allowed as student, I'm under her supervision. For my PhD, I proposed to, in general terms, to look into the landscape of sexual affective relationships between men and women in this country. And I'm particularly interested in intergenerational arrangements in which men of more resources engage in affective sexual material exchanges with younger women. During the bibliographic survey I carried out to try and put together a proposal for my PhD to better understand the phenomenon of such relationships in South Africa, I could not help but realize that many of the concerns of South African authors investigating relationships between Blacks and young women are very similar to those of the body of studies in Brazilian anthropology on sexuality, affection, and marriage markets in a number of ways. They converge, for example, with regard to the revision of simplistic dichotomies and binaries, and the effort to treat subjects' choices with dignity, even when subscribed by complex power structures. I believe there is great gain looking at these two contexts in parallel. So for the past year, I've been trying to put together this first attempt of doing so. So in this presentation, I would then like to talk about how some academic productions in South Africa and Brazil have been navigating these discussions about economic and sexual exchanges. There is an openness inherent to presenting these preliminary ideas to an audience of experts. So people who are more familiar with the realities I'm trying to understand. So it's a great opportunity that I value greatly to be presenting in this department, but that might involve some stutters. So I apologize in advance, knowing there is so much that I probably missed or do not yet fully understand. It has been nevertheless a fascinating process to get to know these texts. I called this paper Values, Blessers, and Dreams of Upward Social Mobility, Brazilian and South African Scholarship in Conversation. Until fairly recently, a few people in Brazil were familiar with the concept of sugar daddies. In these past few years, this scenario has changed, and the term is being mentioned in news articles, soap operas, and memes throughout the internet. Not a week goes by that friends, relatives, and colleagues aware of my research interest, they send me messages where they write in all caps, "Have you seen this?" Attached with internet links they come across online for lifestyle blogs, interviews with girls, or web pages that specialize in uniting sugar babies to sugar daddies. It is a struggle to keep track. The notion of intergenerational material sexual affective exchanges between men and women is not new, let alone surprising. What strikes me as interesting is such rebranding of time-old practices with English terms, and the internet tools that are behind the widespread of the notion. I first heard of the term in my first visit to South Africa early in 2017. I was struck by the frequency in which sugar relationships, as they're sometimes called, were mentioned in informal conversations and news articles. In both contexts, there and here, the understanding of the term is somewhat similar. Sugar daddies make use of their greater social status to offer young women material goods in exchange for sexual favors. While a good part of society condemns this kind of relationship, new technology tools facilitate the meeting of men and women who wish to engage in these exchanges. In both countries, common dating apps like Tinder are filled with profiles of men who refer to themselves as sugar daddies or blessers and say that they're looking for an attractive young woman to spoil, as well as profiles of sugar girls looking for older men. In addition to popular relationship apps, specific websites for finding sugar relationships are available in the market in both South Africa and Brazil. The well-known international platform Seeking Arrangement is also present in both countries. So in the first part of the presentation, I'll bring a survey of the ways sugar relationships have been written about in mainstream media in this country, in parallel with efforts by part of the local production to challenge the morality regimes that inform social thermometers about these arrangements. In the second part, I seek to invest in the interconnections between Brazil and South Africa, pointing to the ways in which Brazilian production has been dealing with similar debates and contexts. So, looking into news articles published in recent years in South Africa is very clear that the term blesser is widely known and used both in tabloid type publications and in independent or understood as more respectable news outlets. I did online searches for the term blessers and sugar daddies on the web pages of 5 news outlets. I did it on the Sunday Times, Mail and Guardian, the South African, the Citizen, and the Daily Maverick. I found the expression sugar daddy syndrome or blesser phenomenon in a number of news reports that dealt with the practice of older males enticing young girls with airtime, clothing, shoes, jewelry, and cell phone in exchange for sex. In an article on the Sunday Times, the country is a world leader in online searches for the term sugar daddy sites. The term has already been used to accuse the current president, his predecessor, as well as a number of major public figures. The ANC Youth League warned, do not have relationships with sugar daddy or blessers in a statement. A member of the Youth Executive Committee, Jane Cossa, says young girls should stop looking for shortcuts in dating blessers. The Women's League Young Women's Desk national convener of the same party, Precious Banda, states that, open quote, if this man funds your lifestyle, we've got limited options because the man is the funder. There are existing opportunities like free higher education, and we are saying young women must go to school and engage in economic activity. End of quote. Similar statements in opinion pieces are current as in the following excerpt. The blesser-blessee lifestyle has recently shot to fame. Truly, it's shameful, disgusting, it's deplorable. Simply high-class prostitution offered temporary gain. What has our society come to? Young women are stooping low enough to be used as exchangeable commodities. All this for handbags, wigs, and champagne. In a different quote, have we become so enslaved by money, appearances, material things, and the need to project fake realities that we're willing to forego our self-worth and discard our moral fiber. End of quote. Some studies in South Africa and elsewhere in the continent have shown that adolescents whose domestic units receive state or financial aid for children were 2/3 less likely to have a much older boyfriend than younger women in households who did not receive the benefit. Such systems could, the researchers argue, substantially reduce unsafe choice of partner by teenage girls. Interestingly, these results are not at odds with the statement of the spokesman for the then controversial South Africa platform, Blesser Finder, Letras, who says he's confident that there will be demand for his company service. Demand will continue, he argues, until government takes significant steps to correct poverty and inequality rates in South Africa. Although these new reports often closely associate the practice with an increasing spread of HIV among young women and an increasing cases of teenage pregnancy, the morality of the practice seems to appear more often as the core of the piece than matters of inequality. Academic production about the so-called transactional intergenerational relationships are also marked by policies to combat the HIV epidemic. In an attempt to deal with the high rates of HIV contagion, especially among young black women, portion of the population among which the rates have especially increased, A wide range of studies focused on the widespread existence of intergenerational transactional sexual relationships. Primarily, this literature raises questions about the unequal nature of these relationships and the vulnerability of young women to risky or coercive sexual practices. However, as part of the production has been trying to show that unvaried arrangements and their negotiation is much more complex than socioeconomic data alone can describe. What this production wishes to highlight is there is not merely for poverty alleviation that women decide to start these relationships, thus questioning an entire moral regime based on a practical reason, disregarding all the factors involved in these relationships. These works also seek to challenge the notion of women's helplessness and vulnerability in negotiation for safe sex with older men. Tamara Shepard and Ana Strebo bring examples that reflect the agency of young women in negotiation in terms of their relationship. Their preference for older men, the authors continue, is also affirmed by pointing to the unreliability of men in their own age group. Reports of the importance of the emotional support that these figures of older men can represent is also appears in these texts, in addition to demonstration of the various forms of emotional intimacy that these relationships could involve. Feeling loved and desired was also pointed by young women as important spheres of this relationship. So this body of work has been destabilizing simplistic and binary concepts of older men as inevitable perpetrators of unequal sex and young women as necessary victims who passively engage in these exchanges just to alleviate poverty. While the economic factor is recognized as a motivator for the involvement of women, these authors point to other factors that contribute to the establishment of these relationships. So in addition to being enrolled in historically and socially located practices and exchanges, a factor of great importance for engaging in these arrangements seems to be, also in addition to the dimensions of effective exchanges, the aspiration for middle class consumption. So Hunter, for example, in the post-apartheid period, for Hunter, isn't it? In the post-apartheid period, advertising media clearly combined consumption with ideals of freedom. The middle class, well, now increasingly diverse in terms of race, relates affection sexually in ways that have been changing, although most of these are more mostly in racial terms, taking up leisure spaces such as malls, beaches, and places that were barred for non-whites until fairly recent. This South Africa women's, he argues, South African women's sense of self is also shaped in relation to the increase of wealth in the middle class, which now becomes multiracial. The same author takes the media figure of the It Girl as an example to elaborate on the ways in which transnational media also helps inform contemporary South African communities. As recorded by the South African version of the famous French fashion publication Elle, the It Girl would be sexy, brave, successful, she has lots of sex appeal, is adored and aimed with equal manners, and above all, has a type of self-confidence that does not require validation from no one. So therefore the way that she's represented could be the embodiment of a new elite and a segment now whose entry would no longer depend on race but on class. As highlighted earlier, these authors have been facing this delicate field marked by inequalities of gender, race, class, and generation, complexifying contemporary discussion on gender and sexuality. Now, just a simple word before I go to the second part. So, as I said, in recent years, the name Sugar Girl has been entering the Brazilian repertoire. Many reports of the phenomenon have been published in recent years. All of them feature the Meu Patrocínio platform, my sponsorship in English, as one of the responsible for the spreading of the term. It is a dating online platform which has as slogan, beautiful women, rich men. On this site, sugar babies are described as women who care about their appearance, like to take care of themselves, know the price of beauty. They write, her goals are clear. A sugar girl wants to grow intellectually and professionally and stop worrying about bills. They also offer lists of prescribed behavior in order to become a successful sugar girl, sugar baby. It would be necessary to have an open mind, so no hypocrisy or moral behaviors of past centuries, And also tips to, while on a date, no bombarding him with personal questions, no talking about money straight away, and don't waste your time trying to change him. Also, make him proud to have your company. It's necessary to be impeccable when going out with a sugar daddy. Makeup, tidy hair, tasteful clothes, every detail counts. Remember that he wants a woman who will make other men envious. So, the sugar lifestyle is treated as modern. The international platform Seeking Arrangement makes use of similar discourses. We want relationships, they say, we want relationships to be balanced. We offer our members a place to make this happen. They describe the sugar girl on their website as seeking modern relationships with traditional values. So apparently they don't want traditional monotonous relationships prescribed by society. These don't work anymore. They're looking for a modern relationship, a different relationship that matches their ambition and drive, with a partner who can play the role of a provider or gentleman without placing unreasonable limitations to their personal growth. This is what they call empowered dating. So, social anthropology, alongside with other social and historical sciences, has continually tried to denaturalize sexuality. Brazilian anthropologists Stellenbosch, and Gregori say it's important, however, to understand the political mechanisms that permeate discussions about sexuality when we're dealing with issues perceived as requiring urgent intervention. They go back to the notion of sexual panics as re-elaborated by Gabriel Rubin and Carol Vance, to think about contexts in which complex political agendas ended up using sex as a vehicle for the expression of other concerns, such as those related to an alleged moral decay or social disorganization. This seems to be the case in which researchers are working in South Africa and Brazil. And like South Africa, where production is marked by the HIV epidemic, Brazilian production is permeated by issues related to sex tourism, international human trafficking, marriages associated with the sex markets, and prostitution. According to Universidade, it is a production crossed by interests in supporting the rights of sex workers and the dialogues critically with policies that had restricted commercial sex and limited the mobility of people involved in sexual and economic exchanges. In this scenario, Brazilian production has particular characteristics in dealing with intergenerational material affect sexual exchanges. A lot of South African production tended to work with the notion of transactional sex. It is a notion that includes exchanges of money, gifts, affections, and sex between two unequal poles as a part of a broader set of exchanges. This notion highlights the separation between, on the one hand, forms of effective sexual intimacy with material exchanges, and on the other hand, prostitution. Brazilian anthropologist Adriana Psetteri argues that in the work carried out in Brazil, these exchanges, including prostitution, are understood to go beyond strict limits, demonstrating how commercialized sex, kinship, family, home, work, for example, coexist and inhabit these exchanges. Brazilian anthropologist Cláudia Fonseca, in the mid-1990s, introduced us to the figure of the old man, o velho. Among the women battling in Porto Alegre, as often sex work would be referred as, the old man represented an ideal. In addition to regular payments, they offered gifts, trips, eventually a house. In return, they were given the impression of privileged access to the affections of the sex worker. She helped us at the time to deconstruct the sense of exceptionality inherent to the prostitute category. For Fonseca, the same old man also appeared in the repertoire and ambitions of women who did not battle, who were not sex workers, from working class backgrounds in these same contexts. The notion of upward social mobility by means of relationship and or marriage with older men were widely present in the imagination of these young women. Marriage and sex markets are also deeply intertwined for Adriana Psetteri. In her wide research in the northeast of the country, the figure of the older foreigner, who also offers help, was mobilized by sex workers as a way to ascend socially, including by marrying these men. Here I turn again to the notion of social panic and go back to the question raised by Carrara and Gregori earlier. How the human sciences read the conventions that make up the normalization and criminalization of practice that, although involving issues related to the right to free expression of sexuality, provoke the violent reactions, evoke the possibility that we are facing a new wave of sexual panic. So Sheffer and Strebo, working from this country, advised that researchers and professionals in the field question their own gender constructions and the ways in which they may be reiterating binaries, and in the way they carry out research, interpret their data, and make recommendations. A second critical point for authors working from South Africa and Brazil is the need to pay attention to the danger of reproducing global hierarchies in dealing with effective sexual material exchanges. Again, Sheffer and Strebo, they warn that the specialized scientific view of intergeneration relationships, in particular those of transactional nature, may be serving the function of othering poor and African communities. This study warns of similar risks in the production of knowledge in which only people from poor and sexualized and racialized countries are linked to these exchanges, movements that tend to sexualize and make inequality exotic, taking primarily as reference, when dealing with transactional sex, communities of low income without exploring these dynamics in other social strata. These girls in Brazil and South Africa make use of their attributes to achieve, among other things, access to consumer goods, status, and upward social mobility. Facing barriers of gender, class, and race, they are not in the same position as their old men, as their black peers. This is not a new notion. Still, social media and new image sharing tools and relationship apps for smartphones have been forming new corporalities and other languages through which to state wishes and life goals. The notion of sugar lifestyle or empowered dating make us question how these platforms are helping to discursively reconciliate antagonistic notions such as modern relationship with traditional values. By taking part in available effective sexual and marital arrangements and sometimes narrating them with the discourse of personal empowerment and feminism, these women continue to search for new old men. It's a pun in Portuguese. I believe that with reflective and generous work, as in examples of South African and Brazilian production that I tried to outline in this presentation, we can achieve a nuanced look at the complex contemporary landscape of sexuality and conjugality. And it is to this body of work that I hope to contribute in the following years. So thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you so much to both speakers. I think I'd like to give an opportunity for the audience to ask questions at this point. So either to Laura or to Tim would be perfect. So if I can get a first round of questions, we'll deal with about 4 or 5 at a time, and then we'll have a second round as well. This one over there. Anyone else at this point with a question?
And sorry, if you could just introduce yourself when you ask your question.
Oh, okay. My name's Claire, and I'm a PhD student in sociology department. Okay, I have 3 questions, but I'll actually just ask 2, just to be fair. Okay, but both the questions are for Laura. The first one is, I saw on your slide you wrote something, was it USP in Marxism? Okay, and I just wanted to know if you could elaborate a bit on that. And the second question or point is, I was quite fascinated that your presentation referred to these university rankings more than once, and when thinking about things like colonial logics, I'm just interested why that was something that you sort of used, because those aren't unproblematic indicators by which those rankings are sort of devised, and I think how those indicators are formed should come down to an idea of what the role of a public university ought to be. So I just thought maybe, although it wasn't the focus of your presentation, maybe you had something to say about that. Does that make sense?
Shall we take all of the questions?
Take all of the
at once?
questions.
Yeah. Get a second.
I'm Fernanda from University, Brazil. So my question is for Thais. Thank you so much, Thais, for your presentation. And I'm very curious about where you started. Maybe I should clarify what you said at the beginning. Did you mention that part of the literature that you have from Brazil actually tackled the question of the sugar relationship from same-sex relationship between men? Is that what you said? And so if so, I didn't get it wrong. But I
question.
Hello, Nancy.
Hi, I'm Ella. I'm an honours student, sociology. My question's for, sorry, I don't want to say names. Tiriba. I wanted to ask whether your PhD looks into what the education system teaches in terms of sexuality in high schools and what they teach on how they define transactional sex and the difference from that to human trafficking in context of South African Brazil where it's quite rough.
And there was a fourth person.
Simon.
Yes, I'm a retired sociologist in the department, and I have a reasonable knowledge of French. So I have spent probably some time at 10 Francophone African universities on Africa, and at about 5 Anglophone universities, and it is clear in Africa that one of the largest constraints, walls between having the possibility for interaction between these universities is simply language. Graduate students at French Francophone universities don't even receive English articles to read, and even less so, the Anglo universities don't prescribe French articles about Africa. I think the south-south between us, South Africa, and Brazil would be really a wonderful program to enlarge. So my question is about that. What Stellenbosch has a graduate school for African students, and if a student applies to this graduate school from a country which is not Anglophone, they have to show that they have some training in English before they come. I've had 4 students from Francophone countries, 2 have finished their doctorates, 2 are busy at the moment. And Stellenbosch offers them English courses to improve their English. They're writing their theses in French. There were students coming from Gabon to Stellenbosch, and Gabon had money, and they actually paid these students 1 full year before starting their studies to learn English. So my question is, how do you grapple with this issue from São Paulo side? Do you want a graduate student from South Africa to have some training in Portuguese? And there we have a difficulty. I'm against Stellenbosch's Department of Modern Foreign Languages because they are only Mandarin, French, and German, and not Portuguese. I don't know whether you know that. How do you address this? When you've got students here, I mean, what kind of training in Portuguese ought they to have, either before or during arrival in São Paulo?
And then Anne had a question as well.
And as well.
Yes, mine's actually related, Laura. Just wanted to ask you, when you mentioned about the teaching a short program for Portuguese, what is your language policy in undergrad and postgrad at São Paulo?
Yeah. So, thank you for the questions. I'm going to start with the first one. You were talking about this, no? About this point. I mean, it's what it says, a strong tradition in research, but USP Marxism, it was very important because we had one, it's not recent, but there is one very important professor from University of São Paulo that became a deputy, and he was one of the most important Marxists in Brazil. But what is important to emphasize is they've translated many books and articles, and it helped to development of this area. I think it's make part of this, don't you? And it was like the 70s, during the 70s, they developed a lot this field of work. And it's part of the faculty, that in Portuguese, Faculdade, Filosofia, Letras e Ciências Humanas, so philosophy, letters, and human science. And actually, USP started there, in this field, that now is under attack, you see. So it's not a hard science. And so it's this area, I don't like to talk on that way, but it's much more left-wing. And I don't think that it's a contradiction what I said, because USP is a very, very traditional university. Now we have an affirmative action, so we have much more Black, Indigenous, and colored students, but it's really new. So we've been under some pressure from the students, which is good, really good. So we've been changing things. We have to, all the time, we are under strong pressure for attaining these rankings, and so we work a lot. But at the same time, we need to deal with the difference, you see. So it's something that has been happening. And I do think that here we have a very interesting experience that we could share about it. You see, about this idea. Yeah. So actually, we have this international Portuguese course, and we receive students, but in general, we don't expect that someone speak Portuguese, you see. So in general, we have students, they take care of them. We have some courses and some support from the international office, and we teach in Portuguese, but sometimes we give to these students articles in English, and we think actually that language is life. If you are in contact, if you live there, if you are in contact for a while, you'll be able to express yourself in Portuguese, but you can write a paper, article, the final assessment in your own language, in French or in English, so it's okay, it's not a problem. And sometimes we help. We have a new program there as well. We've been actually, it's really new. We've been trying to teach some classes in English or with material in English, and sometimes you have students that if they are fluent in English or French, they help us to deal with this. It's not we don't have the formal political we have is this one. No? You can take some class, and we have another course called Brazilian culture, and you can learn about Brazil in Portuguese, and with sometimes some material in English that helps the process. This is what we have there, but it's quite new actually.
So Fernanda, thank you for the memes, introduction. So sorry, no, I mean the literature I was talking about in Portuguese is not, it doesn't relate to same-sex relationship. It's mainly we have a strong body of work that focuses intersexuality in terms of LGBTQ, of the LGBTQ population. A lot of have supervised a lot of colleagues of ours in that direction. I mean, we have a study group, where we call it the Humanas in Portuguese. It's the social social markers of difference. Yeah, I'm sure there's a name in English. But yeah, where we have a lot of colleagues dealing with issues of same-sex relationships, but that's not this literature that I mentioned that is done in Brazil relates to heterosexual couples. Now your question is how to go like from memes to theory. I think or to the field. No, I don't know. I guess what has been happening in Brazil is I don't know if it might sound conservative to say, but there is a normalization of certain attitudes regarding the fact that you would maybe it's more okay to go out with somebody who's older or has more. I think it sort of normalizes some things that perhaps wouldn't be frowned upon. But I don't know how immediate these things are, or how how slowly this has been, like being installed in our society, at least in urban centers. I don't know how that would work for the rest of the country, but I've been spending a lot more time on Instagram since I started the PhD. I thought this was for research. And, it is interesting how these new corporalities also, just make a lot of. I think it will make a lot of sense to think about that, because these how like items of fashion or the way to show your body, your whole thing. I mean, through those images and access to consumer goods, everything is just everything starting to follow like women that other people are following, and how they perceive life in this such Instagram-like fashion. I think it's. I don't know how to talk about that yet, but I think there will be something there that goes like from Twitter to Instagram to to Seeking Arrangement is the platform that people are using now. So hopefully I'll be able to talk more about that the same. And right. So I'm so sorry. It was I wrote, but I can't really read my writing. Ella, right, so you wanted to know about how this relates to some sort of human trafficking as well, but there was a question before that, wasn't there?
I think, yeah, it was just that what's the teaching of transactional sex and sexuality in schools and high school?
Well, we just started something new in the country, which is abstinence. Yeah, I really don't know how that's going to pan out. I mean, even though every study seems to know what happens. It's just that, well, with Bolsonaro being elected over a year ago, he has this new minister for women, family, and women, family, and sorry?
Human rights.
Yeah, women, families, and human rights minister is this very conservative, angelic woman who's just I don't want to get very passionate about it, but it's difficult not to. Well, still, she put forward this new agenda for combating like teenage pregnancy and HIV spread in young people, which is abstinence, which we haven't done ever, and so I don't know how that's gonna pan out, but I guess. I don't know. I think a lot of I don't know how this used to be taught in curriculum in different, like in public or non-public schools. Although there has been an increase in the same study group that we have, postgraduate students that work with gender and sexuality and matters of equality in general. We have a group that we're often called by schools to go and we used to be called by schools just to go to schools to talk about gender equality. Whenever they would have like cases of transphobia or homophobia, they would get in contact with us, and they would go to schools and do workshops about these kinds of things. So that would be one way to address it. That I'm sure that they have other like postgraduate students doing these kinds across the nation, but the phone hasn't been ringing recently. Let's just say. I really don't know. And the other question is really interesting as well, because this production in Brazil deals very heavily with human trafficking, but they do tend to look at it in rather critical terms, because a lot of them are working with sexual economies concerning women and also foreign men. So a lot of these women go abroad, especially to countries in Southern Europe, to work as sex workers or to marry locals and to do things in that regard. I used to be part of that as well. I studied from a master's. I dealt with German men who married Brazilian women that met online. So it's just a very interesting area of study back home. And but the thing is that with human trafficking, that was usually used as a reason to deporting all of these women who wanted to form like burn. So human trafficking for a lot of these researchers thinking about that in the service just has to be thought carefully, because it just could be a way for you to, keep in your wealth islands up north, and just saying that by means of protecting women, which they're not so much doing, they would, so by using human trafficking, excuse for lack of a better word, they would, make it impossible for women or LGBTQ people down south to access, especially European countries. So they do have this tendency to look at, but it talks about that quite a lot. It is a complicated area, but they try to look at it critically in sort of brave terms, because it's difficult to talk about human rights violation at the same time. So what is it? It's just the fact that you can't go abroad, or they're trying to look into that. Thank you for your question.
And then we do still have time for more questions. So come in here. 2, 3, 4, 5.
My question is actually I wanted to speak on a few things, and I think the first one I wanted to speak on was that I should introduce myself. Sorry, my name is Rose Pio. I'm a postgrad student here. The framing around relationships with older men in heteronormative relationships is that when the parties are black, it's always negative connotations to it, right? And that these are victims, and that these women and that these people don't have agency, or that they're not choosing to be in transactional relationships. Because essentially, all relationships are transactional. Yes, money. If you're not in a financial transactional relationship, then it's emotional labor that you're doing. So we don't talk about those things. Because even traditional relationships. And I think it's important. It's interesting to think about that from the context of South Africa, especially seeing as we're so traditional and we're so quick to judge those kind of relationships, and especially from the older generation. And I think the reason for that is especially when it comes from like women in the ANC Women's League, is that these relationships are sort of a disruption of traditional relationships in this country, right? And that men were expected to be breadwinners in the family, and the women, you look after the children, and then that's it. But that relation in itself is transactional, because if you're a stay-at-home wife and you wait for your husband who's working somewhere, they have to send you money every month. So what's the difference between that relationship and the kind of relationships that young women are forming now? And also what I wanted to speak about, I can't remember now.
Okay, there's a question there, and then reference, and then she.
And then Dennis.
Dennis as well, and then she. Okay.
I think my question is related. Thank you for this really interesting presentation. But if you track through history, transactional sex has always happened. Europe, South Africa. So let's look at South Africa. And if you go to the 90s and the 80s, and you've got people like Saul Kersner, and you've got people like Dr. Bala, wealthy men who in relationships with fairly working class women. And so my question is around the terminology and what that does. So with the emerging black middle class in the 90s, you get the birth of these terms around sugar babes and sugar dads. And my concern around terms is how white men look at Donald Trump. Today he is known as Donald Trump. We remember white men who have these transactional relationships by their names. Chris Saul Kersner. But then with the emerging black middle class, we came up with different categories of classification. And the classification became that black men can only be perpetrators. They can only be taking advantage. And they can only have sex with beautiful people if they were paying for it. But white men, and look at the white men in those relationships. So let's look at Trump as an example of his father. And so just a question, how
Hi, I'm Chelsea. I'm a line student in sociology. I've got two questions, both for Thias, but they'll be real quick, I promise. You mentioned that intergenerational transactional is, maybe you're familiar with the movie Pretty Woman. It's quite sort of a famous movie, one that is well loved worldwide. It is essentially about an intergenerational transactional relationship, but it's very favorably viewed and well loved. So I wonder, in terms of historic data, was post that movie there any kind of increase? I'm not sure if that's maybe something that is available that can be looked at, but that's the one question. The other question that I have is essentially about the sex work industry. I think maybe 8 months ago, there was a discussion in South Africa at a sort of national level about maybe legalizing the sex industry in South Africa. I'm not really sure what happened with it. I didn't follow it all the way. But the question that I want to ask is that you sort of mentioned there that it wasn't just economic factors that was encouraging people to enter into these relationships. Quite a big part of it was the status of accessing middle-class consumption. And I wonder, because sex work, prostitution, as a criminal activity or a nominally criminal activity, obviously has an associated lack of status, lack of prestige. You are a criminal if you engage in this. So I wonder, if the industry is legalized, what kind of effect would that have on people trying to enter intergenerational transactional relationships? Would there be a decrease?
So I have a question more from the economic side of this inquiry. So in the 1950s to 70s, when baby boomers and the older generation were coming into their young adulthood, from the public sector, Keynesian economics kind of gave a public safety net to them, and which meant that they could buy houses and gain an education without really incurring debt. And also, the Fordist model of industries meant that from a private sector perspective, that they would also have security in the jobs they have. And as we moved from Keynesian model to more neoliberal model of economics, those safety nets disappeared, and with the privatization of education, that meant that we saw that you normally start your young adulthood with a lot of debt, and the deregulation of the housing market and the stock market led to the crash in 2008, which meant that when we enter young adulthood, there's a lot of economic problems that are still consequences from those crash. And also the post-modernist model of work that prioritizes flexibility over security means that most workers, when we enter work, we have a very precarious relationship with work. Do you think these failures of the neoliberal model that promotes flexibility and kind of an open market solutions over a more mixed system is an explanation for the increase in intergenerational relationships? Because younger generations do not have the same abilities to generate wealth as our parents.
There was a question from Shaheen, and then Bashir, and I see Cheryl.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on that same thing. But I was wondering, maybe also you could explore more, so obviously on the one hand there's this fascination with non-white, sexual relationships, you mentioned it. But there's also something about conspicuous consumption. And it's something that also, before you were talk, thinking about recently. So maybe you can, look at cake club, to look beyond that. Like how, give us a better sense. Conspicuous consumption is actually, in South Africa, largely a white phenomenon. But in sociology and anthropology, it is presented as a black phenomenon. Fascination with the middle class. And that could be something to be interrogated, and possibly similarly in the Brazilian context. But I was wondering about the lesser thing. So, when you think about morality, is there not potential to also, famously middle-class morality, sexual morality, which I think Bernard, is about being discreet, not speaking about it, repressed, this kind of thing. So while we know that these things happen, could it be that actually it's the way of speaking by the particular kind of, Protestant-inspired middle class that actually does not give itself into those kind of, it's well known, it's an open secret. You can go to the fancy bars in town and you can see very similar things happen, but the way it is spoken about. And then when it comes up perhaps among the black middle class. And then this kind of appropriation of these labels and this kind of comfort with expressing these things could, I don't have an answer, could potentially be interrogated at a different time with another angle.
Cool. There was two more hands, one from Bashir and then Cheryl also.
I am Bashir. My question relates to when you said that usually the nice, beautiful woman was the one other men to be envious of the partner. So I'm just asking the question related to gender performances, and does it become a question of this is a real relationship, or is it just some sort of a performance that this person is putting up?
Can you repeat that?
Come again?
Can you repeat
Oh
that?
yeah. My question is in relation to gender performance, the theory around that, and can the relationships, like transactional sex relationships, can it be seen as real relationships, or does it become a performance of some sort, where the lady is just trying to play her best part in securing the bag?
Okay, thanks very much to both of you, Cheryl from this department. And speaking as a boomer, Marxist feminist background, and linking on to Shahid's question, just asking about, while working with and trying to think about agency and moving away from moralizing, etc., how does one also think really seriously about a critique of consumerism and consumption? So I think it's possibly differently phrased a little bit, but it links to that question.
So I have a question for Lara. I have. And I mean, so you have the provocation about the public university, right? And São Paulo being a public university in which students don't pay, and Stellenbosch being a public university in which students do pay, right? And South Africa. So I mean, I want you perhaps to take that a little further. We had a Fees Since Forward, as you know, movement in this country, which was arguing at one moment for free higher education, but it was also, I think, quite clear about a kind of class basis of that, and being aware that it could be free higher education, but at minimum it had to cover everybody earning up to a certain amount of money, or whose parents or whoever was supporting a certain amount of money, and that people with money should pay, right? I wonder how that gels in the Sao Paulo context. I mean, does free higher education mean that anybody pays? Does it have a class angle? And who does it end up benefiting? I mean, you know the answer in a way, but I want you to spell it out. I mean, does free higher education in Brazil promote access to many of the working class, poorer black populations to the university? So.
Okay, well, thank you so much for the fascinating question. I don't know what so sorry, we'll just find it. So, that is fascinating. The fact that it starts becoming an issue once it's just the black middle class. This is something that I will, thank you for pointing that out. That makes a lot of sense, yes. And why isn't every relationship transactional? Yeah, maybe, right? I mean, I think it's just, well, I don't know. I think that for a long time, Western eyes were looking to the so-called third world, right? I mean, the ways that not only in this continent, but maybe in Latin America as well, maybe in a different way, they would, said like police is removed of love and only like sexuality and transaction. I mean, expressions of intimacy would be read in complicated terms, even when you look at I mean, those famous names that Laura mentioned, that we look into our anthropological mandatory courses. I mean, the way they looked at marriage and kingship in this continent, it's problematic in itself. So I guess thinking about these kinds of marriage and transaction is something that I think it's fascinating to do. I will. So yeah, what's the difference between a normal marriage and a transactional relationship? I think it's the morality probably involved, and the fact that we're looking at subaltern and sexualized, racialized populations that had to follow certain standards to be in our neighborhoods. Maybe that's one thing. But I will go really quickly through them because I know we finish very soon. Right. And then it was a very similar question, right? I mean, black men can only be a perpetrator. I think I will. Yes, that is. I will. Yeah. I'm sorry, I got really disorganized. Just 1 second. Sorry?
Maybe you can answer.
No.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. Bernard, I know it's a big question there now, because public education there it's a value. It's for everyone actually, no one thing. But it's something that it's now under attack. The Bolsonaro government want to they've been working actually for privatizing the university there, and it's a kind of struggle there now, and maybe Paul could help because he studies this part of politics, but it is something. It has been more democratic now. It was for the elite before, but now we have some many programs in a federal level, especially not for University of São Paulo. This is really new, but in a federal level, it has started like 15 years ago, more or less. And it's changing, so it's much more democratic now. I'm not sure if you could work with it on this way, you see, because as far as I know, most who are there can't afford an education with quality if it is not on this space. So it's going to reconfigure everything, and not sure how it's going to work. I think it's something that you have here. Not sure if social science, if sociology, anthropology, if you have as well. But I think it's very interesting how when you become a doctor, you have to work in a few areas.
The community service.
Yeah, the community service. Yeah. So you don't have this kind of service there, but it's something really interesting. Yeah, but it's a question, and it's something that we've been discussing.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Right. So I think I'm better organized. I think that back home we also see, consider problematic when blacks enter the middle class. When we were doing better 10 years ago, and black and colored people starting also showing up to these places of consumption, there was always, we still see it. People saying that, air So it's always like this social anxiety regarding saying, you know, people of color in places that have previously had only being accessed by the white elite. So there's certainly something there. So I will look at that closely. Thank you. And so transactional. So what's the difference to a normal relationship? And I think it's similar to your question as well, right? I mean, is it a real relationship? I mean, yes. What am I to say? I guess when working with Brazilian women who met their boyfriends, their German boyfriends online and wants to go to Germany to marry them, did they love them for real? I guess yes. I mean, it's difficult. I don't want to be in a position to decide what it's, you know, how people you know, show their affection. But there is some literature that thinks about how for a lot of these women to demonstrate their love and affection was a way to understand themselves as complicated, as like as modern citizen as well. Like it would be a cosmopolitan thing to show affection in a certain way. So this performance is also, you know, it could be also a sense of self. Or so yeah. So it's just, I mean, what is it? If we go too far with that question, I mean, we're all gonna, you know, be in that waters. So. Yeah, long history. I don't know if Pretty Woman like made an increase, because that's an interesting question, but I don't think that women would, in these exchanges, would consider themselves as sex workers, because she was saved, right? In a way, I mean, Pretty Woman, Julia Roberts, and these women, I think the salvation would be something else. It would be like she was saved by a man, by love. These women, other kinds of salvation, perhaps. I don't know. But in fact, when you look at these platforms who are creating these new discourses concerning these relationships, they do make an incredible effort of moving away from the idea of prostitution that hangs around these exchanges. Because also in Brazil, sex work is not criminalized, but everything around it is. And also you don't want to be like considered. They even say that, oh, you shouldn't feel obliged to have sexual intercourse, sex and that happens naturally, so they completely move away from this idea. And I don't, and that's why I also don't know what what would happen if, you know, sex work was criminalized, if that would be erased or increased. I don't know. But I do believe that, you know, the conditions of workers, sex workers would improve, so that there should be, you know, enough in itself. The safety nets, that's interesting. I mean, when I tried this out a couple of times in Brazil, and when talking to a Brazilian audience, I would try and make, you know, efforts to like localize, I mean, South African to the Brazilian audience, and I would talk about the declining marriage rates and the rising unemployment. I mean, the criticism towards like the new liberalization that the ANC decided after, you know, the segregation period regime. And but then some anthropologists cringe. They say, "Oh no, you can't use data to say that, you know, there was this automatic thing." But I do believe this should be interconnected. Hey, I mean, if men are not being able to raise enough funds to do the marriage payments as well, as is so traditional in some communities here, I mean, what other kind of material exchanges are going to, you know, permeate relationships between men and women? If not, you know, in a material reality that's changed, in a gender reality that's changed, what other, you know, exchanges are going to take place? I think that I've read amazing things like from South Africans about these kinds of things. I mean, people are talking about like a crisis in social reproduction, and yeah, everything is just very interesting in that regard. They talk about the grants as well, right? How, I mean, women don't need the men. That was Bernard actually talking about how, you know, how women don't need men anymore, and so yeah. So I think that would be. I'm also trying to look into that as well. Safety nets. And right, I don't know what ubiquitous means. I don't know what ubiquitous means. Sorry, I don't know. Okay. What? Sorry. Right. So. Okay. Right. So. Yeah, I think I I still don't know how to look at consumption exactly, but I do think that I did put on my proposal that I would look into that. So I need to make like a better survey on how to start. And I do think, I mean, somebody told me that this was the country in the world with the biggest numbers of shopping malls or something. So I think it would be fascinating to look into that. So thank you. I don't know how to to talk about that much more. Yeah, so that was the questions there. Consumption. So yeah, so I think that's actually. Sorry if I missed something.
Sure, go ahead. Give your questions answered. Engaged.
It was engaged.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Well.
So yeah, thank you to both of the speakers who joined us today, and thank you for deepening the friendship between Stellenbosch and São Paulo. And also thank you to the audience members here today, and thank you for engaging, and we look forward to the rest of the year's seminars to be held here.
And next week, Shahid Taub is giving a paper on sacrifice around the events at Clifton, December 2018, January 2019. Yeah.